welcome, and thanks for coming. I thought we'd get maybe 3 people here today on a day like today. So even the people, I invited a couple people, and I didn't even think they were going to show up. So I know there must be intense interest in Egyptian obelisks. I'm being sarcastic. If you've never thought about them before, then join the club. I lived 74 years without thinking of obelisks for 15 minutes. In the last 2 years, I've thought about them every day. So you could say, get a life, but but I'm going to tell you the story of why I got interested in them. And they always say when you give a presentation, what you should do is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a slide presentation that will tell you about why I wrote this book. It's all photos. There's no words. It's just hopefully a little bit of color adding to this topic. But in the process, you'll understand why I wrote the book. Then I'm going to give you a 40-minute presentation, a trip around the world about where these obelisks are. And I'm only going to read 2 pages from the book. It'll mainly be me talking about this, but I do want to read a couple of pages and a poem as well. And then at the end, I'm going to leave it for 2 minutes to say, here's what I think it all means. I have more questions than answers. I'm going to spoiler alert right now, but there is a little bit of a philosophical message here at the end that I wanted to share with you for what it's worth. So our story does start in ancient Egypt, and I want to get you in an Egyptian frame of mind, which I don't believe any of you are at this point. And I am going to ask you a trivia question, the prize of which will be a coveted, free, first edition of Obelisk Odyssey, which may not mean much to you now, but someday it will be a cult book and it'll be worth something, okay? So I'm going to start with the highbrow question. And I've done a dozen of these talks, and if nobody's ever gotten this right. And I ask this because I want to flush out the group. I want to see if there's a ringer in here. Because if somebody knows the answer to this, I'm going to get real nervous, and you're going to come up and give the presentation. So I'm going to give you this one, and then I go down the food chain with my follow-ups, okay, if you don't get this one. The Italians they don't call it Italy, they call it Italia. The Germans don't call their country Germany, they call it Deutschland. The Finns don't call it Finland, they call it, and I always mispronounce this, Suomi, or something like that. The Egyptians do not call their country Egypt. That's a Greek word. What do the Egyptians call their country? Nope. At least I got a guess. Normally I don't even get a guess. That's Spain. And it's Portugal. Yeah.
Home?
There's a ringer for you. That's another good. No, it's not a good guess, but it's a guess. The answer is Misra, M-I-S-R, and it's an Arabic word, and it means the country, the province. Okay. All right. Now let's go down the food chain a little bit. Little bit of a more accessible question, but still most people don't get this. Another Egyptian question. 85% of Egypt is Muslim, but 15% is Christian. What sect of Christianity are those 15%? Yes. Who got that? All right. Coptic. Coptic Christian. Wow, good. That's very, very not well known. And I'll tell you in a second. You might want to wait till the end of this, sir. You might not want the book, but it's free. Okay. Coptic Christian, I'll get into it later, but there are only 2 Coptic churches that I know of in all of Boston. There's a fairly big one in Natick, and there's one 4 miles from here in Scituate, St. George and St. Mary. And one of the fun parts about writing a book like this is you get to meet people, and I met the bishop there, Bishop Bishoy. It used to be a Catholic church, I believe. And it was just fascinating to talk to him about in some sense, the oldest branch of Christianity. It was founded in 70 AD by St. Mark the Evangelist, who lived in Alexandria. And it was founded, and then in the 3rd century, there was split, as there always is, over some fine point of Christianity, whatever. And but it's a fascinating religion and a lot of good people in it as well. I'll tell you what my next question would have been, just to show you how far we go down here. It was going to be this, and there's no prize. Name the most famous Egyptian actor. He starred in Dr. Zhivago, Omar Sharif, and Lawrence of Arabia. The other question after that was, name the rock group in the 60s that have an Egyptian name, and their big song was Wooly Bully or Little Red Riding Hood.
No, I don't know it. I should.
Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. Okay. Hey there, Little Red Riding Hood. You sure are looking good. They don't write them like they used to. Where's Cole Porter when we need him? So you can tell what kind of book this is going to be. I mean, it's going to be part history, a little bit of religion, a little bit of pop, and some reflections. Okay, so it's kind of a hybrid. So let's start with what is an obelisk? An obelisk is a stone pillar that is square at the bottom, and it has a musical adaptation to it. It's it tapers to the top, and it has a little pyramid at the top. It's pointy. That's the generic definition of what an obelisk is. The word obelisk is Greek, by the way, obelisko, and it means skewer, like a shish kebab skewer in Greek. And that's what the Greeks thought when they saw these Egyptian obelisks. But the Egyptian obelisks are very specific. They're the oldest obelisks, and they have several characteristics. One of which is they all come from the same quarry in Aswan, in Egypt. Secondly, they were all erected by pharaohs thousands of years before Christ. And they're all monoliths. They're all one piece. So, for example, there are many obelisks in the world. Washington Monument is a famous one. And actually, it's the tallest obelisk in the world at 555 feet. It was the tallest building in the world at one time. But it is not from Egypt. It came from the granite quarries of Maryland and Delaware, and a little bit from Berkshires, believe it or not. And it's 500 or so individual blocks. It's not a monolith. It was constructed, in piecemeal, if you will. These are only 26. There's only 26 Egyptian obelisks left in the world. 11 of them are in Egypt. 15% are scattered throughout the world. And the book is about me visiting all 26 of them and telling their story. How they got to where they got to, and why I think they're of interest to a modern society. Okay, boy, this is a good group. I'm going to get into that. It is, but it's not Egyptian. It came from Quincy, and it's not a monolith. It's a fascinating story in and of itself. I've been working with the National Park Service up there because I wanted to use some of their pictures, and they're great. I hope they're still employed. I mean, they're under the gun. They're kind of depressed a little bit, but they've helped me immensely. They're just wonderful people. So let me start with this. Now, you're all young. You're all got the future in front of you, and you're going to do a lot more traveling, like myself. Do you have a bucket list place that you've never been to? Ireland. Okay. Anybody else? Nobody for Cleveland? That's my hometown, and so I always get a laugh on that. It's hurtful, but it's true. It's a good place to be from, as they say. My bucket list was Egypt, and I live in Duxbury now. We had lived in Rome for a number of years. I worked there, got interested in ancient history, Rome, traveled to Greece a number of times, went to Tunisia to see the Carthaginians, Lebanon to see the Phoenicians. Got very much interested in ancient history when we started living in Italy 30 years ago. But I'd never been to Egypt. And I thought, wow, what an outrage that is, the most famous ancient civilization of all. So I said, I want to go. COVID was just over. The clock was ticking in terms of how would I have the energy to do this kind of thing in the future. And so I said to my wife, let's go to Egypt. Normally she's here, by the way. She was busy. She did the illustrations for the book. They're better than my text, by the way. But she couldn't make it today, unfortunately. And so we kind of play off of each other, so you're stuck with me for the whole thing. But I said to her, let's go to Egypt. She had zero interest in going to Egypt, zero. Too difficult. There was a little bit of a fear factor there. It's got that kind of a connotation. So I said, I want to go. Can I go on a guy trip? So let me tell you about guy trips, at least as far as my wife and I are concerned. We had been married 10 years, and I said to her, can I go on a guy trip? I screwed up my courage. Where do you want to go? I said, well, my buddies are going skiing. And why do you want to go with your buddies? I said, well, you don't ski, honey. And I've never gone to this place before. That's a dumb idea. You can't afford it. You haven't got the, we can't afford it. I'm not going to spend a lot of money. This is not a carousal thing. I'm going to go skiing. All right, go skiing. So I come back and I got the cold shoulder for about 6 months. 3 or 4 years later, I screwed up my courage again. I said, honey, can I go skiing again? Why do you want to go? That's stupid. Blah, blah. All right, go. I got the cold shoulder for 3 months. We had our 53rd anniversary yesterday, as a matter of fact. Thank you. It's the thing, everything has changed. I said, can I go to Egypt? This was 2 years ago. I'll go ahead, no problem. Well, can I go for 8 or 9? Oh, no, stay for 2 weeks. Go longer, don't worry. I said, well, what are you going to do back here? I got my own life. I got stuff you don't need to know. I'm starting to wonder if I should get worried, as a matter of fact. So I went, and I found 2 other people, guys, whose wife had no interest in going. And I'll tell you who they are, because they're a big part of this book. There they are. So, I know there's a laser thing here, but I'm going to... The gentleman to my right, the man in the middle, his name is Qasser Sharif. And I worked with him for many years. We worked for a big international company. At the time I met him, believe it or not, he was the general manager of Ukraine. But he's Pakistani, was born in Karachi, went to school in Turkey, has lived all over the world. And I was working in Italy for the same company, and we used to meet at meetings, and we were in some oddball locations. We were in Uzbekistan on the Silk Road in Morocco, and he was just he's the smartest person I know. Think of Fareed Zakaria, okay, the reporter and the writer. He carries himself that way. The gentleman on the left is the polar opposite. He's my son-in-law. Dana Snyder lives in North Hollywood, California, married to my oldest daughter, and he does cartoon voices for a living. And he's wildly successful. He does Disney and Nickelodeon and some very, very weird cartoons on the Cartoon Channel, like at midnight. And he doesn't know what they're about. But he's making it, and he's hysterically funny. And so you would say to him, Dana, here's the scenario. Make this up. Do some improv. You've got an Italian chef, a Russian oligarch, a Chinese IT guy, a dog, and a cat. Give me 5 minutes. And he'll do voices, accents, dogs, cats, and he's hysterically funny. So my sister says he's a cross between Fred Flintstone and Buddy Hackett, if you remember the old stand-up comic on the Tonight Show, who my father-in-law went to school with in Brooklyn, by the way, back in the day, but another story. So we had our wives allowed us to go, and we were there for only 8 or 9 days, but we saw a heck of a lot. And if you go to if you go to Egypt, has anybody here been to Egypt, by the way? When did you go, sir? Oh, the Egypt beach. Okay. When did you go? 10 years ago? What did you think? It's fabulous, honestly, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I know there's people worry about safety. I saw none of that, but everybody makes their own choices. So if you go to Egypt, you're going to take back memories of the pyramids, right? The iconic symbol. You're going to take away the thing that blew my mind was the tombs of King Tut and the Queens, the Valley of the Queens. They're like They're 3,000 years old, and they're like they were painted yesterday. They're so vibrant. Now, some of you may have been to Pompeii or some of the old Roman ruins, and if you get any little color, if you get a toenail that has color, they say, oh, this is a great finding. These tombs in Egypt, in Luxor, you walk in them, they're this big, and it's like almost like virtual reality. They're that. So you're going to carry that away. I ended up carrying away, my lasting image is of obelisks, which is very, very strange. So how did that happen? So let me tell you how it happened. And here we are standing. These are the pyramids of Giza, by the way, which is just outside of Cairo, and there's the Sphinx right in the middle there. And I don't know if you like travel writing at all, and I'm not talking Rick Steves or somebody like that, but there's some great authors who wrote about Egypt, and Mark Twain is one of them. And Innocents Abroad he wrote. He went there as a young man, and he tells a fabulously funny story of him climbing. You could climb up the exterior of these things only until recently, and then people were dying and whatever, so they said, okay, no more of that. But it's well worth. You can now go inside, only inside, and we went inside, and it was very difficult. You had to kind of crouch and duck walk, and it was hot. But anyhow, so the story I'm going to tell. Let me give you a little geography here. There were 4 stops that we made in Egypt that got me interested in obelisks. First, a little bit about Egypt. 105 million people. Almost all of them live where it's green, along the Nile. I'd say 85 million of the 105 live in this very sliver of land, only a few miles on either side. All the rest of this is barren desert. This is the delta up here. Cairo is here, Alexandria is here. Those are the 2 big cities. If you take the landmass where they live, it's about the size of Massachusetts and half of Vermont. So think of 85 million people living in Massachusetts and half of Vermont. You think we have a housing shortage now. I mean, think about what that would mean. And so the Nile, the longest river in the world, flows oddly from south to north. One of the very few rivers in the world that does. There's only a handful that do. A couple obscure ones in Siberia, a little one in Florida named the St. Johns River, goes a little bit north in Jacksonville. And there's a river in North Dakota that goes into Winnipeg called the Red River. Not the Red River by Texas, but it goes south to north. So southern Egypt is called Upper Egypt. And northern Egypt is called Lower Egypt because of the flow of the river. Okay, so you got to get that straight. So we started in Aswan, okay, at the very bottom down here, almost on the Sudan border. It's in an area called Nubia, an ancient area called Nubia. Now, I don't know if you know, in Boston, there's a Nubia Square. It used to be called Dudley Square, and he was a slaver, I guess, and they changed it to Nubia Square. I never knew anything about Nubia. It was named after this area, which is very, very interesting, very, very ancient. So that was our first stop, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. The second stop was Luxor, a few hours away. We didn't go by boat. We drove. We had a driver. The next stop was Cairo in the middle, and the last was in Alexandria at the top. And in each one of these, I got a little bit more interested in obelisks. So it was an incremental interest. I had no interest in them, not for 1 second before we made this trip. So Aswan. Let's start with, that's where the quarry is. And all 26 Egyptian obelisks came from this quarry. It's of a red granite. And maybe the most interesting obelisk of all is this one, because it was never erected. And it's laying still in its granite quarry. Had it ever been erected, it would have been half a football field high. It weighed 2,000 tons. And here's an aerial view of people walking on it. You can walk on it, but it cracked, and they were never able to erect it. So you can walk on it now, and it kind of blew me away, all of the work thousands of years ago to create something like this by hand with primitive tools. And how did you get it out of there? And they're still not really sure. And so that night, that was the first night, I still had a little bit of jet lag. I sat and I thought about this. It struck me right from the start. And the only 2 pages I'm going to read to you in this book are the first couple pages, because it sets the tone of what the kind of the headspace that I got in for this whole thing, and it was important to me. First, the very beginning. I was sitting on the veranda of the old Cataract Hotel in Aswan, daydreaming. In front of me lay the hotel's swimming pool, a deep azure surrounded by a well-manicured garden filled with a palette of brightly colored flowers. I'd strolled down there earlier and could recall their exotic aroma. I think I'd seen bougainvillea of some sort. A few of the hotel guests were sitting in lounge chairs, poolside, sipping cool drinks in the intense April heat, reading or chatting or napping. On my lap was a tour book of Egypt that I was occasionally glancing at, idly filling in the blanks of some of the things we'd seen that day. And we'd seen some fantastic sites of antiquity. And here I was alone, sipping on a Lafroig, that's a scotch, surveying the scene. The Nile, not quite visible from the veranda, but still a near presence that you could feel. A sense of the passage of time and the evolution of mankind was in the air. If you spend a whole day immersed in such immense antiquity as can be found in Aswan, you can't help but have a stray, if undeveloped thought of your place in the universe. And my place was now abundantly clear. Having retired from a long career with a large international corporation that had allowed me to travel the world, I'd subsequently had a pretty good run as a management consultant. But now the last one of my clients said they no longer required my services, and I no longer had anyone clamoring for my brilliant insights. All of this was fine, actually, since I'd grown pretty bored with working on the same old business issues. The only even marginal effort I'd made to get another assignment was to spend 10 minutes in a half-hearted attempt to spiff up my LinkedIn homepage. Under profile, I described myself as a seasoned veteran, a mature leader, and a pro with a long track record. I was hoping to present myself as a trusted advisor with the wisdom of Solomon. Instead, I'd conjured up an image of a gray-bearded, stoop-shouldered Methuselah, whose next consulting gig would be in that big boardroom in the sky. Under skills, I dusted off a litany of buzzwords I'd long since disdained. I was a builder of ecosystems. I could break through paradigms. I possessed insights that were value-added. Blah, blah, blah. It was all pretty cringeworthy. Is that all I am after all these years, I thought? A collection of tired cliches? In my pursuit to build my personal brand, the most obnoxiously pretentious but now considered absolutely essential practice in business world today, I had positioned myself not as a sleek new Lamborghini, but as a lumbering 59 Ford Edsel with tail fins. Proclaiming to myself that at any rate, I was now a man of complete leisure, free to pursue whatever entertainments my understanding wife, Eileen, would allow me to pursue. And with a backlog of Chase Sapphire Reserve points that would allow me to stay at places like the old Cataract Hotel without depleting whatever financial legacy we could leave our 4 daughters. I was a guy luckier than I had any right to be. But still, I was wallowing in a sense of self-pity because, oh, woe is me, I would soon be an irrelevant, unwanted speck in the universe, just like the nameless, faceless mass of humanity that had preceded me in Aswan for many thousands of years. But back home, I could see myself slipping down the rabbit hole of lying in bed till mid-morning, reading on my iPhone nasty reader comments to online news and sports stories from other bored, supine irascibles of a certain age, and responding in kind. I fully realized that this was what my daughters might derisively call a first world problem. But frankly, it was the only problem I felt capable of addressing at that moment. So that was kind of, that first day threw me into a self-reflective mode and a sense of the passage of time that really stuck with me on that trip. And frankly, I haven't gotten over it. And it's been almost 2 years now since that trip occurred. So that first day we were in Aswan and had that interesting experience. The next day, as I said on the map, we went up to Luxor, which is about 3 hours north. And we had a driver that drove us. And I saw my first 2 erect obelisks. And this is in the Temple of Luxor, which is a fabulous site. It's one of the greatest sites in the world, the largest temple in the world. And they do a little Disney sound and light show there too, but they have 2 great obelisks there, side by side. And what I learned was, what two things impressed me about this. Number one, this was hundreds of miles away from that obelisk quarry. How did it get there? And they hypothesize, and this is thousands of years before Christ. And how did they erect it? I mean, how did they erect this? And they're not totally sure on that either. The other thing that impressed me was this one was erected by a pharaoh I had never heard of called Hatshepsut. And it turns out they only discovered in relatively recent time that Hatshepsut was a woman. And she it's a complicated story. The Egyptians knew she was a woman. She didn't try to hide that fact, but she dressed as a man to command their respect. And then subsequent pharaohs obliterated the fact that she was a woman. It was only in the 19th century that it was found, and she was the first great, and it was a great period for Egypt. She was the first great woman head of state in history, going back to about 2,000 years before Christ. So that impressed me, that there was kind of maybe a modern story behind this as well, not just an ancient story. Okay? Then the next place we went was Cairo. Cairo, 20 million people, one of the largest cities in the world. You either love it or you hate it. I loved it. I mean, it was just wall-to-wall people, noises everywhere, etc., chaos, but just a great sense of vibrancy. And right in the middle of it is an obelisk. It's in their center, their key square. It's called Tahrir Square. Tahrir means liberty. And it was here that two modern revolutions occurred that deposed Egyptian heads of state. One was Mubarak. You may remember him. He was deposed for a guy who was, it turned out he was elected, who was Morsi, his name was, who was turned out he was too radical, and he was persecuting people and the Christians and Muslims as well. And he was deposed by the current guy, El-Sisi, who was, some say it was a coup, but he's still the head of state there. So most of the rallying to depose these two modern presidents occurred at Tahrir Square. And so I saw it and I said, boy, there's a modern story here. Okay, there is a geopolitical story, and standing right in the middle of it is an obelisk that goes back thousands of years. It's standing in a modern society. And then our final stop was in Alexandria. And Alexandria is a place that most tourists don't go to. It's right on the Mediterranean. It doesn't have any ancient sites left. It's not the time of the pharaohs, but it was founded by Alexander the Great, a Greek. And it is a city of 5 million people. It's the biggest city on the Mediterranean, including all the European cities on the other side of the Mediterranean. And to me, it was fabulously, fabulously interesting for many reasons. One of which is St. Mark lived here, the evangelist, launched the Coptic Christianity faith. Alexandria was one of the three great centers of ancient Christianity, along with Rome and Tarsus. But what was also interesting is that it was here that Julius Caesar met Cleopatra and Mark Antony. My middle name is Anthony, so I'm Mark Antony. I kind of relate to Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, that whole thing. And we were going to a restaurant that night in Alexandria, the three of us, my two traveling buddies and I saw in the elevator this little sign. Feel the moment. You're now standing at the same place of Cleopatra's obelisk that she built in honor of her love with Mark Antony, which is located now in Central Park in New York. Enjoy this once-in-a-lifetime experience. Don't forget to take pictures. The spirit of their love is still here. And they have here an old photograph of this obelisk that had stood since the time of Cleopatra, and it's now in Central Park. So I said, wait a minute now. So I'm adding all this together. There's a Aswan, that's where the quarry is, and then there's Luxor, and then there's Cairo with the revolution, and now these things are all over the world. And I found out that there's 11 still in Egypt and 15 scattered all over the world. And I thought, boy, this is kind of interesting. And so it was when I saw that sign that I got interested in it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to see all of them. I've seen some here in Egypt, and there's 15 outside. I'm going to see them all. I didn't say I think I was going to write a book, but I ultimately did. So why did I get interested in these obelisks? Well, first, I've worked in consumer products my whole life. And we have a thing called the supply chain where you talk about where does a product come from and how does it get to where it's going to get to and how do you put it on the shelf. And we've had you all know we've had supply chain problems over the years. Well, this is probably the obelisks, in my context, are the first globally distributed consumer product. Although they weren't really consumer, you didn't buy them in stores, but they were sourced in a quarry. The way they got to where they got to logistically was very interesting. The manufacturing process was interesting. It doesn't have a UPC, but I saw that it had some sort of a supply chain connotation. So that interested me. And what really interested me even more was the fact that they were standing in modern society. They weren't in a museum. They weren't little fragments. They were whole cloth, thousands of years ago, that were standing in modern surroundings where real stuff was still happening. And I thought, boy, are we the same species as the guys that created this, years ago? So how much has changed? And it was a time where, there's a lot going on in the country and in the world still is. And you wanted to reflect and say, have we made any progress? Have we ascended to some higher order of being? I wanted to connect the past with the present in some way, so that appealed to me. And believe me, I'm no scholar. This is Ted Lasso does the ancient world. Okay, this is very much in that vein. So I want to make that very clear. And the book is written that way. But I do some bloviating too, and you do that when you get to a certain age. So what this book is about is these 26 obelisks, how they got to where they got to, and what do they mean in the current context. And to kind of give you a trial run as to what I mean by that final point, I'm going to use the Bunker Hill Monument. The second most, I think, famous obelisk in the United States after the Washington Monument. And so this is the Bunker Hill Monument, courtesy of the National Park Service in Charlestown, as it stood when it was first erected, okay? Which was a few years after the battle. The first great American monument. Not Egyptian, came from Quincy up the river there. They tried by a train, that didn't work. They had a hell of a time getting it up there. Quarried in Quincy, many, many individual blocks, okay? And it stood, by the way, a contest was launched as to what the monument should look like. And architects from all over the country put in their bid, put in their sketch. And the guy that won it was a Harvard student named Matthew Greenough. And it was a sketch of an obelisk, which was unknown at the time, much in the United States. He had been a student in Rome. He had seen an obelisk, St. John Lateran, if you've been to Rome, it's a great church. And he said, there's a quote in the book that says, the obelisk shouts, it has a voice in Rome. It means something important happened here. And something important happened here. Bunker Hill was a great moment for the country, even though it was technically a defeat. And the voice is of liberty, of victory, even though we didn't win that particular war, et cetera, that particular battle. And I want it to shout that, so it has a voice. And so it was put up for that reason, a specific voice. And it won, although it was subsequently tweaked a little bit. But now if you go to Charlestown today and look at this obelisk, I don't know if you've been there recently, but the whole context has changed. The whole environment has changed. And you go there now, and it's very urban. It's cool. It's cool. I think it's cool. It's urban. It's very built up. There's a little patch of green there. I've been there so many times in the last couple of years, just kind of, kicking the tires on this and trying to come to grips with what all this means. And it's very, this is a view from the obelisk down the street in Charlestown. And look what you see up here. What's that? It's the Lenny Zakem Bridge. And it's built in the form of an obelisk. There's two obelisks. And the creators of that were very cognizant of the obelisk in Charlestown, and they named it the Lenny Zakem Bunker Hill Memorial Bridge for that very reason. And who was it named after? Lenny Zakem was a guy he was a Jewish guy, who was preaching religious tolerance, Can't we all just get together and find common ground? A great figure. And so if you go to the monument now, the Bunker Hill Monument, and you look there, or if you know, and I took this driving in my car, by the way, on my iPhone. These are obviously iPhone photos you're going to see. And you look at it that way, you know, you might think, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Traffic, right? It's just a terrible thing. But I didn't get quite a picture. And there's the garden. But I couldn't quite get it, but the obelisk is right there. It brackets it, it frames it. And to me, the voice of the Bunker Hill Monument has been amplified. It's not just liberty and victory in a war. It's religious tolerance. It's Lenny Zakem. That's the voice that comes through as well. And so that's what this book, to some degree, is about. How is the environment, how is the context changed around these most ancient man-made obelisks that are standing in the world today? There's nothing more ancient standing in modern society in urban environments today than these Egyptian obelisks. They're by far the oldest man-made things standing in the world. So, with that as an orientation, let me get into there were the 11 Egyptian obelisks. I showed you a few. There's 15 outside. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 examples, not all of them in the interest of time, as to what these obelisks are. I picked some I think interesting ones. First is the Central Park obelisk. Anybody ever seen that? Right behind the Museum of Art, right off of Central Park, 83rd and 5th Avenue. Most people don't even look at it. You know, you just walk right by it. But the thing is 1,500 years old. It's by far the oldest thing standing in North America in a city. And you kind of walk by it. It's the hieroglyphs are kind of not there anymore. You know, they try to restore it every now and then, but it's standing there. And the way it got there, it's very interesting. All of these that are outside of Egypt, it's very interesting how they got there. But this one, it came all the way through the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic, and it was very easy to get it across, it turns out. But when it got to New York Harbor, it took 150 days to get it from the pier in Manhattan to this place in Central Park, which is only 2 miles away. And it was because they didn't know how to move it through the streets. There were no trains. They tried to build some tracks. It said they had a blizzard, and they finally got it erected. The Masons were behind it. In Masonic lore, obelisks in Egypt have a sacredness to them. There's a pyramid on a dollar bill, etc. And so they thought there was some mystical quality to this. And so they were there on force. There were 10,000 people there the day it was erected. But the Vanderbilts were behind it. They were funding it. And the message was, again, and you'll see it with the other ones, the Egyptians were great, now we're great. We're the inheritors of that great culture. We've come of age. This is America in the Gilded Age, and pay attention to us, and good for us for that. And so that's how it stands. And but what's the modern context of it? Here it is. And here's what, I don't know if you've been to Manhattan recently, but on Central Park, these skinny skyscrapers have gone up in the last few years, and they're amazing. This one and this one are the second and fourth tallest buildings in North America. And you know what this one is? They're condos. There's only 46 condos in here. And it's the narrowest, skinniest building, height to width, in the world. And there's only 46. They go for 9 figures. And it's very interesting to me. This just was last week. I was reading about it. There's a big lawsuit now going on with this one. Jennifer Lopez lives there, and a bunch of IT guys, etc. Very rich, 9 figures, literally. And there's cracks developing. And this is only 5 years old. And so now, what's the over/under on this living to be 3,000 years, like the obelisk, right? And so, it makes you think. This obelisk was supposed to be for the Egyptians, not just a tribute to Pharaoh and his might, but it was a spiritual thing. It was supposed to be a frozen shaft of sunlight dedicated to their sun god Ra, which was their big chief god, okay, and the sun disk and etc. This is a monument to wealth. I mean, it's a vanity project, really. Who knows how many people even live here? But it's kind of interesting that it's maybe going to fall apart someday. Although I'm sure it won't. They're trying to prop that up. But it's very thought-provoking when you put this in a wider context and you think about who created this and who created that, and what are the values behind it. And I have more questions than answers, by the way, so I'm not here to preach one way or the other. I'm very, very agnostic on a lot of this, although I do have my opinions. So then the other thing, so that's part of the New York story. And then the first time I was there, I went up to it, and there were 7 or 8 people, young people, standing in front of it before they were going to go into the museum. And I went up to them, and I have a baseball cap on. I'm kind of dressed like this, and God knows what they thought I was a panhandler or something. And I said, "Excuse me." And one had a Rutgers sweatshirt on, and one had Princeton, so they were pretty educated. I said, "Hey, what do you think of this obelisk?" "What do you mean, old guy?" "Well, what do you think of this thing?" "Well, what is it?" I said, "Well, I started to give them some background, and they could care less. I mean, they were just had no interest in this at all." And one of them said, "Wait a minute, no, I have seen an obelisk, and I love it. It was one of the great things." And I said, "Where was it?" And he said, "Las Vegas." And true, honestly. And I remembered that I had been in this hotel. It's the Luxor Hotel right on the Strip, and it's got 3 parts to it. It's got this little obelisk which says Luxor on it. It's like their signage. Here's their little Sphinx, and you check in there, and they have some sleeping rooms there. And in here are the casinos and some sleeping rooms. And I said, "Well, yeah, but there's this other thing there. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's dirty and it's old, and nice guy." But he said, "I was at a trade show there last year, and it was just fabulous, a great swimming pool, et cetera, et cetera." And I've had this experience once before with American tourists in Italy, which is where we lived, at Lake Como. Anybody ever been there? There's a beautiful town there called Bellagio, right on the north. And I remember being there a few years ago, and I was alone, and I was having a glass of wine right on the little veranda there in front of this hotel with the beautiful lake in front of it and a snow-capped mountain in the back, even though it was June. And a Perillo bus tour came up. Behind me, I could hear a screeching bus. And a bunch of people from Philadelphia came, and 2 women stood right in front of me, blocking my view, and I could hear what they were saying, and they were very disappointed. And I said, "Why? I can't help but overhear what you're saying. And by the way, your leg is on my table here." I said, "Why are you disappointed?" And it was clear as we talked, their frame of reference was the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, with the colored fountains and Frank Sinatra, My Way, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't poo-poo that. My son-in-law, Dana, who I mentioned before, is from Las Vegas. And his father's a great guy, a very successful architect. But it makes you wonder, what is our frame of reference when we see these things? We put it in our own context. So anyhow, that was Central Park. And there's the Luxor signage as well. So the context, is my point, of the New York obelisk is very different than it was when the Vanderbilts put it up there. And people have changed to some degree as well. Then there's London. That's got the other Cleopatra's Needle. There's 2 of them from Alexandria. This actually came over a little bit before the US. It was the same thing, Queen Victoria's era. We're the heirs of the Egyptians. We're the great power. The sun never sets on the British Empire. We got to have an obelisk. So they got an obelisk. It was not an easy journey. It's a very interesting story. It was coming up the Bay of Biscay out of the Mediterranean up to Britain. There was a huge storm. The boat was thought to have sunk with the obelisk on it. It was found 3 days later, floating, just randomly. It was saved. Several people died trying to rescue it, it made it to London, and it was put on the London Embankment, if you know where that is. That was built in Victorian times, right on the river, and there's sewage system underneath it, etc. And what's interesting about this obelisk to me, and been there a number of times since over the last few years, is that it's on the water. It's the only obelisk still on the water. Even though they all had to come up the Nile, there's only one left of all the 26 that's still on the water, and it's this one off the Thames. And what's interesting is the modern context. This was not what Victorian Britain was like. The wheel wasn't there, the London Eye, Big Ben, et cetera, et cetera. And what's interesting is it makes you think about the passage of time, in my opinion. When this came to England, it was the center of the world, and it's still a great city. Don't get me wrong, but it's not what it used to be. This used to be, the river used to have kings and queens going up to Hampton Court and Greenwich. Now it's Uber boats. People go into soccer games in the West End for theater, and it's fine. That's great, and it's a wonderful country. But you think about how civilizations wax and wane. You may have heard of this. I have a French son-in-law, not the one in here, and there's a French saying, and only the French would say something snarky like this, that America is the only society that's gone from barbarianism to decadence without an intervening civilization. So that's not nice, and it's not true either. But the point is, we wax and we wane, etc. And you can see that with the UK. Their economy is a shadow of what it used to be. Their colonies are bigger than they are by a long shot right now, particularly India. And when Brexit occurred a few years ago, the saying was, we're going to make Singapore on the Thames. They were taking one of their colonies as their role model. And so it makes you think about, what's lasts and what doesn't. And I just want to read a short poem to you. It's not my poem, because I think it captures the way I felt when I saw this. And if I can't locate it, I'm just going to paraphrase it. I'll paraphrase it. It's Ozymandias. You may have heard of it. Shelley wrote it. And it's a famous poem. And he's traveling. Ozymandias was a pharaoh called Ramses. We think of Yul Brynner, that pharaoh. And the poem talks about how this great pharaoh, Ozymandias, had a statue in the desert. And underneath was a sign that said, I will last forever, behold and fear me. And Shelley is looking at this, and it's totally collapsed. The head is in the sand, there's rats crawling around, and it's like, you too, your day is come and gone. Nobody remembers you. And so that's kind of what I felt looking at that, about the passage of time and ebb and flow of civilization. And what's very interesting also is that underneath this obelisk, and there's a little sphinx there, by the way, so it's a little bit of Las Vegas here, right, with the et cetera, is a time capsule. And underneath, and in the time capsule, it's known what's in there. Unlike the Central Park obelisk, the guy that chose what went in there, they buried it, they put the underneath, and then he died. And so he never kept a record of what was in there, and you can't get at it now, so it's a mystery. But it is known what's under here, and it's just stuff from the Victorian era. It's hairpins and a doll and stuff like that. And when you think about it, in the age of the Egyptians, how much stuff did they have? They had maybe 20 things, maybe. The Victorians in their house, they maybe had 100 things, dolls, etc. How many things do you have in your house? Probably 1,000. I mean, if you go to, what's the closest supermarket here? Is it Stop and Shop? Or there's the average Stop and Shop has 40,000 items in it, SKUs. And how much is too much, and different flavors, et cetera, et cetera. And so it makes you really think about temporary, and it's all throwaway. The Egyptians thought in terms of permanence. These obelisks were meant to live forever. Their pharaohs were meant to live forever. They were embalmed. Their bodies were going to live forever. I came back from this and I looked at my own house and I saw all the stuff that I've got. And I said, nobody's going to want this. My kids aren't going to want any of this. It's going to be 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And you got to get ready for that. That's what it is. It's all stuff that pleases you at the time, but really how much of it really is going to survive. And that's kind of what I thought looking at this one. And there, of course, I had to get this picture. This little kid doing this. Anybody remember Steve Martin on the Saturday Night Live, King Tut? Go on YouTube and watch that. It's hysterical if you haven't watched it in a while. Born in Babylonia, moved to Arizona is the lyric that he sings. Buried with his donkey, he was his favorite honky. Steve Martin said that, not me. But anyhow, so it's Las Vegas. I mean, you got your little Sphinx, you got your wheel, etc. Times changed. That's not what it was like in Victorian times. This is one of my favorites. Anybody know where this is? Paris. It's on the Place de la Concorde. And Place de la Concorde is at one end of the Champs-Élysées. On the other end is the Arc de Triomphe, so it kind of orients you. And you walk down from one to the other, and you come to this at the Place de la Concorde. Napoleon's buried there. And this was moved in the Napoleonic era. Now, I'll get more into that, but Egyptian history and civilization was largely forgotten from the times of the Romans until Napoleon went there in the late 1700s to conquer it. And he never conquered it. The Brits ended up conquering it. But he brought with him 200 scientists, archaeologists, linguists, etc. And they got the world reinterested in Egypt. And they brought back, again, same story, Napoleonic era. We're the heirs to the Egyptians and the Romans. I'll get into them a little bit later. We're the new guys in town. And this one was actually brought over after Napoleon by one of the successors, Louis Philippe. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he actually lived in Boston for a while. And he lived in the Union Oyster House. And you go there to this day and you see a little plaque, Louis Philippe, future King of France, lived here. And it's kind of interesting that a guy that lived in the Union Oyster House brought this to Paris. But it's in great condition. They've restored it. It's got a gold top to it. And it was put on the place intentionally where all the guillotines occurred. It was supposed to kind of, okay, that's behind us now. We're going to all be friends, et cetera, Place de la Concorde. So that was the intention. But it is still, and here's how it stands versus the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower used to be the tallest building in the world. But it was overtaken, believe it or not, by the Washington Monument. And then there's been a series of tallest buildings in the world ever since. By the way, the tallest building in the U.S. is the Freedom Tower, which is in Lower Manhattan, right? The tallest building in America is now underway. At least the ground has been broken. It's going to surpass it. Do you know where it is? Oklahoma City. Go figure. The Legend Tower, it's called. So anyhow, that's what's going to happen there. So that kind of is the way it looks today. But it's also still the science place. It's got a modern context, not Napoleonic, because demonstrations are still held there. I don't know if you remember the yellow vests of a couple years ago. All that occurred right around the obelisk. World's Aid Day, you know what that is, right? I mean, they gussy it up and they make their own statement. We went there, my wife and I, because my daughter lives in France, for the Paris Olympics, just for a few days. And I said, I got to get a picture of this, even though it's not in the book because the book had come out by then. And there it is. There's, the Olympic rings. There's your obelisk. There's the stands. On one side, was 3-man basketball. They had erected hoops, and on the other side was breakdancing. And I thought, wow, I mean, this stood 3,000 years ago, could they have ever guessed that this would be the modern context? And I missed it by one day, and I would have loved to have gone there. The next day, after I took these pictures, and there I am with these little kids climbing in it with the obelisk in the background. I'm sure you all know who Snoop Dogg is, right? Okay, Snoop Dogg. Well, he did a concert there the next day, and I would love to have gotten a picture with him there, because you go from Luxor to the guillotine to the guy from the Union Oyster House to Snoop Dogg, and it makes you think. It really makes you think about where are we going, and is it good, is it bad? But it's certainly to me interesting. Italy. Italy is the obelisk capital of the world. There are 10 obelisks, Egyptian obelisks in Italy. There's 11 still in Egypt, but 8 of those are in Rome. So Rome is the obelisk capital. How many of you have been to Rome? Okay, probably a good number. And so it's interesting the way it came about in Italy. The first great era of non-Egyptian era of Egyptian obelisks outside was with the Roman emperors. They had conquered Egypt. It had become a colony, basically. It really had become almost a personal possession of Caesar Augustus. He viewed it as his place. Although, the Senate had disagreements with that, but they didn't have much power. He was very much an autocrat in that regard. And so he was the first emperor to start bringing these out of Egypt. We're the heir apparents to the Egyptians, blah, blah, same story. All of the obelisks currently in Rome, all of them fell down over time, except one, and I'll show you that in a minute. And they lay submerged or in fragments for hundreds of years. Nobody gave a damn. They were just laying there. 1500s, what happens? The popes. They say, we're going to put these obelisks that have been laying here in front of churches. We're the new guys in town, right? We're the Egyptians, the Romans were pagans, Christianity. They put crosses on them and they put them in front of churches. And this one is Santa Maria sopra Minerva. It's near the Pantheon, which is, I'm sure you've been there. And I love this one, not because it's a very good obelisk, it's one of the smaller ones, but it's got a great pedestal, and it may be the most famous pedestal there is. And it was designed by Bernini, and it's an elephant. And what's really cool about it, beside it being really a nice pedestal, is that its rear end is very, very consciously designed to point toward a building that's on the other side. I don't know if I have that or not. And it's the building where Galileo was condemned in the Inquisition for the Copernican centricity. Everybody thought the Earth was the center of the solar system. Copernicus, Galileo said, no, it's the sun. And he was sentenced to life imprisonment in that building. By the way, Pope John Paul II pardoned him. It took quite a few years, but they pardoned him. Anyhow, Bernini said, I'm going to stick it to these guys. So he designed the rear end to stick at the building where Galileo was condemned as an insult to the Dominican order that did that. They were pretty harsh with some of this stuff. But that's a good one. Now here's one. You all know what this one is, right? It's the Vatican, St. Peter. And this is very interesting for a couple reasons. One is this obelisk is the only obelisk in Rome that never fell. So they say, oh, the hand of God behind it, et cetera, et cetera. No pope ever had to re-erect it. But it was not located here. It was located about 200 meters back before St. Paul's was built, St. Peter's. And it was brought here by Caligula, the most not decrepit, the most bizarre, corrupt, whatever, emperor of all time. But he brought it here to put it in the middle of his hippodrome, which was kind of his little racetrack, as a tribute to himself. He was very much into Egyptology or Egyptian Isis. He used to dress up like the Isis, the queen, etc. Kind of weird. Anyhow, Michelangelo designs this, okay, and the Pope at the time, Pope Sixtus, says, "I want to move it." It never fell. We're going to move it upright, 200 meters, and put it in front. And I won't get into it, but it's fascinating the way it was moved. Again, across at the top, Caligula, the emperor, superseded the Egyptians, Christianity superseding the Romans. So it's one layer of history after another. Now, what makes this one very special to us, and I'll bore you with a little story here, but it won't take long. What's the modern story behind this, of this obelisk in this square? It's the papacy, right? Whether you're a Catholic or not, we just had a conclave, right? So it's been in the news. This is where, the Pope comes out over here and he's announced and everybody cheers and yells, whatever. My wife and I happened to be in Rome in 2005. As I said, we live there, we go there a lot, and we happened to be there on the day that the white smoke went up and Pope Benedict, it was at the time, was named Pope. And my wife, I don't follow these things, but she is into it. She would bet on who's going to be the Pope, if you could bet on it, and maybe you can somewhere. But she knew who all the candidates were. And so the way they do it is the white smoke goes up and then you don't know who it is. So you have to wait 45 minutes and then the new Pope comes out and so it's it's a lot of theater and everybody's chanting Habemus Papam, which means we have a Pope once the white smoke goes up. So Benedict comes out and my wife wasn't her favorite candidate. I don't know why, but she was shaking her head. We needed some new blood. This guy's a little old school. I don't know. So she's standing there shaking her head. Everybody's celebrating. And so a woman comes up to her afterward and said, "Ma'am, I see that you were not too happy." She said, "No, I'm not. It's just I have some misgivings." And why? "Well, I don't know. We need new blood, and I don't know. This guy's kind of old school." And she says, "Well, can I get some more comments?" She takes out a pen and paper. And I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, who are you?" And she said, "I'm a reporter for the New York Times." So I said, "What? Are you sure you want to do this?" She said, "Well," she said up front. So she said what she said. And so the woman asked her for her name, the reporter. And she said, "I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not going to give it to you because, I go to our church in Duxbury, which is where we're from. We're pretty active, and I don't want her to, I don't want to cause trouble in my parish by anything I said. So I'm just Eileen from Boston." And so after that, all the rest of the trip and all the way home, she's saying, "I should have given my name. I should have given my name. I should have the courage of my convictions. I wimped out. I wimped out." We get home and I buy a copy of the New York Times at Logan Airport, and she's on the front page. Not her picture, but it was written. And if you're interested in I got it in the book. You can access it in the New York Times, and the way it's referred to, it's this reporter is saying, and I know the name of this reporter was saying it was a great spectacle on St. Peter's Square, except one woman did not seem to be totally happy. She's Eileen from Boston, but she wouldn't give her last name because they told the whole story of who she was, but didn't give her last name. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago. The Pope Francis dies. My wife says, "Let's go to the conclave." I said, "Nah." She said, "Nah, let's go. It was such a great experience last time. Let's go." Well, you don't know when the actual white smoke's going to go up, or even when the conclave is going to occur, because you have to have dates and pre-meetings and all that. So we guessed. as to when it would occur. So we went. And, we hung out on St. Peter's for a couple days. And sure enough, let's see, did this come out? Yes, we were there when the white smoke went up. There it is right there. This was just a couple weeks ago. And, everybody's, having a great time, et cetera, et cetera. And there's the obelisk again. I mean, the obelisk is everywhere. I mean, you start thinking about this and it's everywhere. Everybody's happy. And we were too. I mean, it was a guy from Chicago. He's a White Sox fan. I mean, what's not to like, right? And somebody stopped me. It was an ABC reporter. And she said, "Hey, you're an American, obviously. Can I get you to make a comment?" So I made a comment right in front of the obelisk, and it appeared on the nightly news. On ABC, David Muir and that whole show. It was just a snippet. It looks like I'm giving a papal blessing, right? Yeah, that's just the way it was. But I've got a little video of it, and they sent it to me. So we caught lightning in a bottle twice with this conclave. So that's part of the modern story. Final one I'm going to give of the ancient world, or of abroad, because we're kind of over my time a little bit here. This is in Istanbul, and it was put there again by a Christian emperor, the one that followed Constantine. Constantine, of which Constantinople's named after, was made Christianity legal and okay, even converted in the old Roman Empire. And he brought this here, and a cross was put on it again, and it was surrounded by Christian churches back in that era. If you look today, there are no more Christian churches. It's surrounded by mosques. It's a beautiful sight. The call to prayer echoes, but again, it's the same thing that you see happening again and again. It's, somebody else has got a different answer. It's okay. And who's right or wrong? Maybe we're all kind of right, we're all kind of wrong. Again, I got more questions than answers, but it shows you again the evolution of these things and how your things change. And I'm told by my friend, the Pakistani guy that I travel with, one of my best friends is a devout Muslim, that during Ramadan, when Ramadan ends, the people from Istanbul come around the obelisk and they have a great celebration. So it's now theirs. It's been repurposed for that as well. And there's Hagia Sophia. I don't know if anybody been to Istanbul. One of the great places on earth, right? I mean, there's just nothing, not much better. So now that's a mosque too. That was one of the great churches of Christianity at one time as well. So that's what I'm going to tell you. Told you what I was going to tell you. I told you. Now what did I just tell you? I'm not sure what I just told you, except that I've tried to make some sense out of this experience myself. I spent a lot of time going around the world, and I've only given you a few of these things that I think, kind of were interesting for me. And it was a nice experience. But I sat back and I thought about it, and I said, are there any kind of key overarching takeaways? And here are my takeaways. And this is just me. This is Ted Lasso, okay? This is not a deep thinker. This is a guy off the streets. Is history important? Is it important? Is the guy with the Princeton sweatshirt standing in Central Park who loved the Las Vegas Luxor but didn't think, this one at Central Park that goes back thousands of years was interesting. Is it important or not? Is history important? And I want to think it is. I know it's interesting, but is it meaningful? There's all kinds of, axioms over history. Those that don't learn from history are destined to repeat the mistakes. That's a number of people are said to have said that. Karl Marx, I believe, is the one who actually did say it, believe it or not. So I want to believe you can learn from history. And Churchill said, and it's one of the quotes in the book, the farther we look into the past, the further we can see into the future. And I do believe that's true. But I don't see us necessarily learning from history. And it's a paradox to me. You know, it's like every society has to learn the lessons all over again. So maybe AI someday will all feed all the data in, and they'll say, here's what you should do in the Mideast or Russia or wherever. Maybe. Although what AI does is just scrape pre-existing knowledge and put it into common language. So all the mistakes in the future will just be regurgitated in a way that, so I don't think there's much hope there. So, and then when you think about it, as useful as understanding history could be, a lot of times it's subjective. I mean, people can you look at any trouble spot in the world right now, and you can have people looking at the same set of data and historical events and have very different interpretations of it. It's like the Bible, it's like the Constitution. It's very subjective. And, you know, is there a universal truth that comes out of all of this? And you even see some of the most heinous acts occurring in the world that are driven by people with a great sense of history. Well, we had to do this because you did that to us. Yeah, but we did that to you because you did that to us 200 years ago. Yeah, but 300 years ago, go back and forth. Pick your poison. This is what happens. So the study of history is a paradox. It should be useful, but is it? And I think the quote that captures it the best for me is not from a great writer. It's from, I think, a really good movie called The Holdovers. Did you ever see that? It was Paul Giamatti. It was out a couple years ago. It was filmed at Deerfield Academy. He's a teacher of ancient history or history. His kids could care less about it. But he says, and he's got his own issues. He's really such a good actor. He says, history is not a study of the past. It's an explanation of the present. And that, to me, is what it is. It's not, even if we're not going to learn the lessons of it, it at least explains why people feel the way they do. And so I'd settle for that. Can't we just understand where somebody else is coming from? It doesn't mean they're right, but at least it helps explain the way people feel the way they do. So that's bloviation number one. Bloviation number two is, after you see all these things, man is tribal. It's one tribe after another. It's inherent. It's in our DNA. We think we're tribal today. There's some comfort in me believing firmly that it's inevitable. I mean, we're just bred that way. It's either religion or ethnicity or class or education level. People congregate to around their little enclaves, if you will, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper into their own little ecosystem. And it's a paradox to me because I work for a company, as did this gentleman back here, that was a global company, and we did consumer research every couple of years globally. And it wasn't just, are your clothes cleaner or what kind of shampoo do you want? It was deeper every so often. It was a value study. What are your values? And state it any way you want. And it was amazing how common those values were around the world, whether it be Israel or Ukraine or Australia or Namibia. They were all basically the same. It was, I want to take care of my family. I want respect. I want to live a healthy life, etc. And then you take all that commonality and we degenerate into our enclaves. So it's probably inevitable, but there's got to be a way to scope it up so that we're talking about values. So that's bloviation number two. The third one is, it's really not about finding individual truth when you do something like this. It's more, because you're never going to find it, in my opinion. I mean, I guess I'm realistic enough to think that I never will be totally sure. But it's the journey. That's why I call it Odyssey. And if you're familiar with the greatest Odyssey of all, Homer, Ulysses, and he what that is about is, in the real story, he goes from the island of Ithaca off the coast of Greece, which is his home, and he fights for 10 years in the Trojan War, which is in Turkey, modern Turkey, and it takes him 10 years to get back because he gets blown all over the place. So he's gone for 20 years. And he comes home, and there's his wife, and everything is kind of falling apart. And he, ends up conquering his enemies, brings peace and tranquility, and he lives happily ever after. A poem was written in the Victorian era by Tennyson. I don't know if you're familiar with it, called Ulysses. It was JFK's favorite poem. And I quote it in here. And he has a different take on the Ulysses and the Odyssey. It's Ulysses comes back and he's bored to tears. He has been through such a journey and he's learned so much that he has to go out again. And he gets the gang back together and he takes the boat out again. And it's a note of, okay, you only live once and you got to go for it. And you may not agree with the message, but I find it, and so did a lot of other people, kind of an exciting approach as the years go by. And there was a poem, and this is my final takeaway about the journey, and I hope I marked it here. And it was written by an Egyptian poet about 100 years ago named Cavafy. He was of Greek descent, but he lived in Alexandria, and he wrote a poem called Ithaca, very similar to Tennyson's. But here's how he said it. It was called Ithaca. When you set out on the journey to Ithaca, pray that the road be long, full of adventures, full of knowledge. Always keep Ithaca in your mind. To arrive there was your final destination, but do not rush the voyage in the least. Better it last for many years. And once you're old, cast anchor on the isle, rich with all you've gained along the way, expecting not that Ithaca will give you wealth. Ithaca gave you the wondrous voyage. Without it, you'd never have set out. But she has nothing to offer you anymore. If you found her poor, Ithaca has not deceived you. As wise you've become with such experience, because by now you will have come to know what Ithacas really mean. And that to me was my big takeaway. It's a journey, and maybe it's kind of common sense. And the other thing is, you don't have to physically do it, I don't think. I mean, you can think about it, you can read about it. Yes, it's great if you can get out there. One of the greatest travel books ever written, that's hardly read today, was by a writer named Sir John Mandeville. He's a Brit, and he wrote it in the time of Shakespeare. And it was his travels around the world. And it was the best-selling book in English for that era. It turns out he made it all up. He never went. So I'm not saying to make up your own journeys, but you don't have to go out there and break your neck trying to see a bunch of different obelisks. Anyhow, that's it.